Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. It is clear that we have a very checkered history in this whole area of the IAEA and the use to which it has been placed. So, again, back in 1981, the Israelis bombed the Osirak reactor outside of Baghdad. It destroyed it. It was a clandestine nuclear weapons program. And Ronald Reagan had Jeane Kirkpatrick vote to condemn the Israelis in the United Nations. But again, the Israelis were teaching us a big lesson that the IAEA is essentially, at that point in time, nothing more than a paper tiger. It wasn't effective. It wasn't getting the access that it wanted. And the Reagan administration was ignoring that. And within a couple of years, they were actually aligning with Iraq and Saddam against the Iranians in the Iran-Iraq war. So that's a checkered history right there. And then we move up to Libya, and we kind of promise Gaddafi, if you cooperate with the IAEA, if you cooperate with us, no problem, you get peace. But there was rejoicing all over America when we saw these pictures of Gaddafi being killed because he didn't have a nuclear weapon. Thank you, Mr. Joseph, for that negotiation, but your actions did not then lead to the United States kind of dealing with the essence of that deal we were in once we knew he did not have a nuclear weapon. Same thing was true in Iraq. In Iraq, the IAEA was in. The IAEA was saying to George Bush, they don't have a nuclear weapon. There is no threat in the form of a mushroom cloud coming our way. We cannot find it, Mr. Bush. We cannot find it, Mr. Rumsfeld. We cannot find it, Mr. Cheney. Please don't start this war. Give us more time to go through every site, but we cannot find it. And nuclear programs are huge programs. It's not like a biological or chemical program. These are huge programs. And George Bush just started this war. A lot of our problems right now, even this deal, relates to what happened back there in 2003. We disrespected the IAEA, or the Bush administration disrespected the IAEA. It undermined its credibility. Okay, so both in '81 with Reagan, 2003 with Bush, both times they were basically not dealing with the essence of the role which the IAEA has to play. They're the referee. They're the group that has to come in and make a determination as to whether or not there is, in fact, an active nuclear weapons program in place. And we have to determine whether or not they are gaining the access that is necessary to do so. That's the essence of this whole debate. Whether or not we're going to repeat history or we're going to create new history that turns the IAEA into the watchdog, not the lapdog. It turns out in 2003 it was a watchdog. It was accurate. Our inspectors were able to gain access, and the Bush administration just ignored it and decided to start a conventional war because they knew he did not have a nuclear weapon. We would not have invaded if he had a nuclear weapons program. That's the irony, of course, in Libya. That's the irony in Iraq. And we don't invade North Korea because they do have nuclear weapons. All of that is not lost on Iran. That's what complicates this. Iran is saying they don't want a nuclear weapons program. Now, we know that they had a nuclear weapons program historically. We know that they are now negotiating with us to put the program under safeguards. We think for the known sites, this system is sufficient in order to be able to detect in a timely fashion any activities that could lead to a nuclear weapon. We know all that. The question will turn then on their intentions with regard to a secret program and their intentions in the long term. And I would say, honestly, if you're the Iranians, you really don't want to run the risk of the United States and the P5 plus one all agreeing that a conventional military attack on their nuclear facilities is in fact justified. At any point in time, you wouldn't want to match what you have in Iran against the combined forces of the P5+1 if they really wanted to go in? That's a big question. That's a Dirty Harry, do I feel lucky question if they move in that direction. Okay, so I guess what I would say to you, Mr. Seymour, Dr. Seymour, is how do you feel about the 2030s, the 2020s and the 2030s? Because everyone's going to have an opinion on it. I would like to just hear your opinion. Do you think it's likely that they are going to comply or not with this agreement?
You know, that is really a great question. I mean, I think that there's a reasonable chance that they will cheat or renege on this agreement in the course of the next 15 years. And in some ways, I think that's a good scenario for us, because I think if they cheat, there's a very good chance we'll catch them if it involves a major violation, and that would put us in a very strong position to reimpose sanctions, or if necessary, use military force. And if they renege, I have confidence, of course there'll be a lot of finger pointing who's at fault, I have confidence in the capability of the United States to rally our allies and others in order to resume a pressure campaign against Iran. So for me, kind of the easy scenario is that the Iranians have agreed to long-term constraints on paper, but that after a year or two that will fade and this agreement will collapse and we're back where we were. That doesn't bother me.
Can you imagine a scenario where a president of the United States would not feel compelled to take the necessary action in order to ensure that Iran did not have a nuclear weapon in the 2020s?
I mean, I think it is such an American interest to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And of course, that's been our policy since the Reagan administration. And that's when I first started working on the Iran nuclear issue. I think that's a very enduring part of U.S. foreign policy, and any president will have that as an objective.
Can I disagree?
I just need a second. And so I guess what I would say, Mr. Chairman, going back to Jimmy Carter selling, uranium to the Indians, knowing the Pakistanis were going to ramp up their nuclear weapons program in 1980, through the OSIRAC raid, through the vertical arms race of the U.S. and USSR, where we were never going to use nuclear weapons against each other, but this horizontal proliferation continued, ignored, unfortunately, by both of our countries and the rest of the world, all the way up to today. We kind of now have the moment where we have to decide if this IAEA, in its present form, with the mandate it's receiving, under the leadership of Amano, is capable of doing this job. That's the test, and I thank all of the witnesses for being here today. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing.
Do you object if they respond to what you just said?
If I have to stay and hear it, then I'm going to miss the next meeting, and I
Well,
apologize
I'll
to the witnesses.
I'll listen and tell you
don't
what they
mind.
said.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Go ahead, gentlemen, if you will, briefly. And
Yeah,
move
could let me just give a historical example. In 2003, the United States knew Iran had a structured nuclear weapons program and didn't strike militarily. It was even being exposed by the IA.
And that was the Bush administration. They did not. I
Yeah,
agree
well,
with you.
and
So that's
who
the
else
thing.
would?
In other words, no, the point I'm making here is that we knew that Saddam Hussein did not have a nuclear weapons program, and we invaded them. And what was that signal sent to Iran by the Bush administration? Get a nuke, look, be more like North Korea or other countries, and we won't invade
Okay,
you. So
I'm not disagreeing with you. What's your point? I'm just making a different point. Is that don't count on a military strike 10 or 15 years ago.
You're saying if George Bush wouldn't strike, then it's unlikely that a future president
That's
wouldn't
right.
strike.
I don't
Is
think
that
you
what you're
can
saying?
count on it at all.
Yeah,
And,
but again, this situation's all created back then because if we had
All right,
determined,
if we
I
could,
agree
though,
with
let's
that.
let,
if we
I
had
actually
determined
agree.
that
I agree.
Iraq did not have a nuclear weapon, and then we moved the whole coalition to surround Iran in 2003 and say, give up your nuke, and we're not going to invade, we wouldn't even be here today. But
Yeah,
Bush
could be.
decided to violate this kind of trust with the IAEA, and now Iran took the wrong message from it.
yes, sir, if y'all could be brief, that'd be.
I'll try. Let me say, irony notwithstanding, I think it's much better that Mr. Gaddafi met his fate, a well-deserved fate, I would add, without nuclear weapons than with nuclear weapons. I think it's really a hard argument to make that this was not a win for non-proliferation, that we picked up their program and we brought it back here, an illicit nuclear weapons program. And oh, by the way, the IAEA didn't have a clue about the program in Libya. Not a clue. One of the reasons that and I certainly agree with the senator, one of the reasons that Iran wants a nuclear weapon is because it wants to guard against outside intervention. So it continues to brutally repress its own population. That is one of the reasons. There are other reasons: to intimidate neighbors, to expand its influence in the region. There are a whole lot of reasons. I wouldn't list George Bush as one of them.
Yeah. Gary, say more.
And I
wait,
just totally disagree.
If we
with
could,
that.
I mean, it's
That's
getting.
the wrong message to be sending.
I will just say, I do agree with the senator that, and that's why I oppose what we did in Libya, is I do think we taught folks a lesson, and that is if you give up nuclear arms, we're more likely to take you on than if you don't. And I think there was a learning moment there. And I do agree with Senator Markey's comment in that regard. And I do think Iran has learned from that. And I think that that is the reason they're pursuing a nuclear weapon today.